teaching vocabulary. So vocabulary is understanding how to use words in relation to their meaning. So developing new vocabulary involves more than just, looking up words in a dictionary or using those words in sentences. So first of all, we have to define what is vocabulary or what is lexis. So lexis are the, words and the sets of words. So lexis, shows the meaning in the context and the form. Lexis form has prefixes, affixes, suffixes, for example, unpleasant, illegal, yes, as an example here. And also compound nouns like easygoing or collocations, for example, depend on, idioms, piece of cake, for example, synonyms, antonyms, and so on. So lexical set also such as furniture, for example, sofa, desk, table, wardrobe, or for example, food, yes, such as meat, milk, what else? Fruits, and so on. And the next one is word family, base words such as real, really, realistic, realism, and so on. The next one is visuals and the realia. So when you teach vocabulary, you have to remember the important techniques. So first of all, you should use visuals and the realia. One of the most effective ways of teaching vocabulary is to show students the word, especially using, realia and visuals work with primary children, with secondary children, and when you work, for example, with kindergarten children. So concrete words, mostly nouns, can usually be conveyed through pictures or realia, real objects. For example, a word like chair as a noun is quite easy to teach by pointing to a chair or by showing a picture. Some abstract words, however, can often be conveyed using visuals. For example, a picture of a man and a woman plus a heart could be used to convey the word love. So, and therefore, we say that visuals are really important. Visuals and realia are really important techniques to convey the meaning of an object or objects in general. For example, I'm now holding this remote control, and when you are explaining what is a remote control, you can show them this is a remote control. So the next technique is miming and the anecdotes. So it is relatively easy to mime words such as run, walk, and even to differentiate between words that belong to the same group but have quite fundamental differences in meaning. For example, run, walk, yes. For example, what else? Joke, wander, etc. So it is also relatively easy to use mime to teach adverbs of manner. For example, quickly, slowly, happily. Getting students to mime various actions in a particular manner is gesture, and also it is great fun and a good way of making the adverbs memorable so that students can remember. For example, I would say sad, yes, when you make your face like sad, or happy when you smile, for example. And this is really very good way of explaining the meaning of new words. So another way of presenting vocabulary is to tell short anecdote containing the new words. This gives the words a context and helps students understand not only the core meaning but also how the words might be used, for example, in a context. So the next part of techniques that can be included in your teaching is eliciting and the context. So eliciting words from students is an effective way of activating their memories. So in a class, of students, it is quite possible that one or two may have come across the word before, even with the low levels. It also helps you find out how much your students already know. And that there are a few different, techniques for eliciting vocabulary, from drawing a quick picture on the board to giving an explanation or a short example of a situation. So this is really very nice. When you can try this technique even with your primary class. For example, if you bring some umbrella, or if you bring, for example, coat, they can guess that today they are going to deal with, for example, with weather, or with, for example, different seasons. Yes. So, and also it is important to remember when you are eliciting or explaining vocabulary that the language you use is as simple as the language you are trying to elicit. Giving the context for a word, just like, embedding the word in an anecdote helps students see how a particular, item of vocabulary might be used. Again and again, please remember that you have to teach within the context, not isolated, as I have said in our previous lecture when we talked about teaching grammar. Even if you are unable to elicit a word from your students, when you eventually tell them the word you were trying to elicit, it is far more likely that they will remember it and it is meaning. And therefore, please make sure that you back up the meaning of your lexis or new vocabulary, or whether it is grammar. You should give all the time context. And also another technique is using synonyms and antonyms. So a technique often used by teachers, especially at low level, is to explain words by using synonyms or antonyms. So in many respects, this is a flawed idea. Firstly, because many of the words will be of a similar level, and if a student does not know one, in this case they will not know the other. For example, if a teacher wants to elicit, for example, a bag, and they say that if they opposite meaning is impossible, in this case, they can say, for example, white, yes? And therefore, it is very important when you teach, you give, lots of synonyms and the antonyms, for example, short, long, big, for example, small or little, beautiful, ugly, and so on. And the next technique is translation. So translation is another technique that has pros and cons. Many teachers and teacher trainers see translation as as a bad thing, because they seem to feel that translation will in some way prevent the students from even becoming proficient in the target language. And this is quite obviously not true, because there are many cases of learners becoming quite good in a language despite relying heavily on translation. In some instances, translation is clearly adventurous. When you teach to primary class, to kids, of course, sometimes it is important to give the translation of certain words. However, of course, as a teacher of the English language, I encourage all the students and all the teachers of the English language try to convey the meaning in other way, in different ways. So the next one is dictionaries. So giving your students strategies for learning an important part of teaching. When you consider the amount of the time that your learners will spend outside the classroom. It is obviously essential that you help them to become, independent learners. And therefore, please encourage your student giving some different dictionaries, English dictionaries, for example, Oxford or Cambridge English dictionaries, so that the learners can learn independently, looking at the meaning of the words. So there are so many activities and tasks that you can apply in your class. One of them is, taking a student's perspective. So that means when you take culturally responsive approach, and you can do this by framing new words, in examples that are familiar to your students, whether it is geographically, culturally, or socially, economically, for example. Now, this is very important. For example, when you are talking about Great Britain's, let's say some, political or maybe some geographical, contents. In this case, comparatively, you can, for example, give as an example of local content, which is, for example, Kazakhstan's, geography, or some maybe holidays that can be, comparatively taught English or Kazakh, for example, traditions, and so on. So the next one is, creating vocabulary, yes, and the notebooks. So this is also very important because, vocabulary notebooks encourage students to expand their prior knowledge and boost their English language proficiency. Also, handing out notebooks so that they can, jot down something, yes, some new words and their meaning. So you can also motivate your students to think about writing, synonyms and then antonyms beside each new word. I have also, skipped here, using a word wall. So a word wall encourages kids and your learners to focus on learning new words. Word walls are easy to create. Simple, type or handmade a list of words in a large letters and hang them up on a, bulletin, for example, board or the wall where students can see it every day. Nowadays, you can use a different, information technology or different gadgets, such as, ICQs in your classroom, for example, internet resources or different computers, or children can, bring their own telephones, for example, or tablets, so that they can play different games on certain topics. The same with word wall. There are so many, lots of applications such as, wordwall.com, for example, Kahoot, quizzes, Quizlet, and so on. Lots of things. So I'm sure that they are really very helpful in your classroom. So the next one is, connecting word meaning with semantic mapping. So semantic, mapping is a type of, graphic organizer that displays a relationship between specific words and the phrases. So select one student to show, a keyword on the, for example, chalkboard or on the blackboard, yes. And the next thing, encourage students to participate in creating the map with different words. This is really very helpful because I'm sure that especially, children of primary and secondary classes, and even with teenagers, these, mapping work really very, mapping activities work really helpful. The next one is making word catch. So word cards help students to develop the abilities to learn new words and highlight the meaning. So making word cards are really very important because they not only remember the words and their meaning, but also they can do different, crafting, handcrafting, for example, cutting, or coloring, learning different colors and so on. And therefore, this is really very wonderful idea when you ask your learners to make with cards. And the next one is, encourage your learning reading a lot, because reading comprehension, reading helps to remember the words, remember the grammar that they have learned before. And the next one is guided with sorting. Guided with sorting. Give your students a list of words to sort out, various categories, such as parts of, for example, speech, such as noun, verbs, yes, geographical names, for example, cities, villages, towns, countries, or something that they can relate to. Students develop the understanding of new words as they group them into categories. For example, food, so they have to, highlight and group different parts of food, like fruits, for example, meat, fish, milk, and so on. So words, with fixes. So on purpose errors, use a word incorrectly in sentences and ask your students to correct the mistake. This is a really good and helpful strategies. Then in this case, students should correct the mistakes, and also it helps to remember the form and the meaning of a word. And the last one is making mind mapping. So mind mapping involves the use of colored pencils and pens to create the graphic on how the words are connected with each other and similar to the same meaning, so that they can create the semantic map. And these I have highlighted, you see, different strategies and the different activities that you can apply in your class with your learners. So, and please remember again that teaching grammar and the lectures, you have to explain the meaning, form, and the use, and also the pronunciation. Also, both grammar and the lexis should be used frequently by learners and consolidated. Also, grammar and the lexis should be taught in context rather than isolated. And you have to use different techniques like communicative approaches, also different techniques or approaches such as task-based learning, project-based learning, and some other very good ideas, so that they can also reinforce the language, also to apply them. Thank you for your attention.